We're joined now by Kevin Pelton because I love Kevin Pelton. Really is just any excuse to talk to Kevin Pelton. Kevin is the ESPN basketball analyst. He was insider before it's cool to be in, or plus before it's cool to be plus this week. You know, as your agent, I'm a little upset you weren't referenced in any of these press releases this week. By the way, I'd like to point that out, even though you have been there the whole time. Like, you know, you are the foundation of plus.
I don't know if I go that far. First off, it long predates the insider, at least long predates my arrival. But it was in the press release. I don't think I was left out.
No, I felt as though it should have been more highly profiled. But you know, I'll represent you in the. I'm going to start Pelton Sports instead of Clutch Sports just to get it all going. I'll be your Rich Paul, and hopefully it'll work out for you. I want to talk to you.
Nerlens Noel.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that wouldn't go. Wait, he wasn't represented by. They're claiming that they were not representing Nerlens Noel during that. What is the truth here?
I can't remember the exact mechanics. I know he changed agents at some point that summer.
Yeah, I don't. Because they got all bitter about this. They were like tweeting out that they did not represent Nerlens Noel during that period of time this week. So, just what could be fake news in sports for all we know.
We'll have to go back and do the research on that one.
Yes. I think that was interesting. I want to have you on because I kind of took this theme of international basketball for our hour here of on the 24 hours of basketball talk for 2024 for the Jamaica Basketball Project. You have been working really hard from an analytical standpoint of trying to figure out what international numbers translate to NBA numbers. And what international players you can look at and say they'll be all right. Take me through how that's evolved, where it's been different, and where it kind of is now.
Well, it's interesting timing because you didn't mention this to me going into this, and it happened to be something I was working on this afternoon, was going through and updating some of the projections for the leagues that, much like the NBA, came back in a bubble setting over the summer in the ACB, the German league, and the Israeli league. So there were a handful of top prospects who were playing in these games, including Denny Avdia, who's probably going to be a lottery pick. So I had to get their projections all updated. But yeah, it goes back to, I guess, when we started doing the Shaney projections on basketballprospectus.com back in 2009 or 2010 was, you have this problem of players coming to the league from overseas. We need a way to project them as we're projecting how well teams and players are going to do. And, the way you're going to do that is obviously through the stats that they've accumulated overseas. And as far as the evolution, I think the big thing was just adding more leagues. Originally, it was only guys who played in EuroLeague or Euro Cup, which were the two biggest international continent-wide competitions in Europe. So you have a lot of players who go from those leagues to the NBA and vice versa. It was relatively easy to do that in terms of, players lose 5% of their 2-point percentage, but they take 10% more 3-pointers because they're playing a smaller role than they were playing in Europe now that they're in the NBA. And you can just sort of apply that to other players and, expect that that's more or less the translation that they're going to make. But, now it's, I think, at least 8 to 10 leagues that I'm translating for, and some of them lower levels than others. So, if you're going to do this for Australia, for the NBL, which is really important this year with LaMelo Ball, whose projection comes out shockingly good, I guess I would say, in that case, then it's kind of 2 layers of translation, because it's not just guys necessarily going back and forth to the NBA, because that's pretty rare from those level of leagues, but it's guys going from there to other international leagues or to the G League, which is more common. And then so, it's kind of it's a 2-step process now. It's from the NBL to those leagues and from those leagues to the NBA.
Do you find, I would imagine, you're probably better, I imagine these things, you're better than I would ever be, but I would imagine that every now and then you run these numbers and some 3rd, 4th guy on some European team comes out as like, oh, he'd be a great NBA player. And you're like, well, actually, no, that's a unique skill that matches just to that league. Does that happen? And how do you see through that? Or do you just not and know that the scouts will see through it and they never become a prospect?
Yeah, there's definitely guys where you're like, there's a physical limitation here that this is not going to translate the same way in the NBA that it does in their league. Although, sometimes you're surprised. I kind of thought that Boban Marjanovic might be that kind of player when he came to the NBA after dominating in Europe. And lo and behold, he proved that his skills were so incredible in terms of his strengths, and he was able to mitigate his weaknesses that he has carved out a nice role. But yeah, I can't remember the name. There's like a German center in EuroLeague who has been one of the very best players, and everyone tells me he's much too slow to make it to the NBA. Or you'll have the 5'9" guard who can hold their own, but is not going to make it here in the same way. One of the most interesting examples, I think, probably one of the biggest misses for the international projections was there was a Chinese prospect a few years ago named Zhou Qi, who the Rockets drafted in the second round. And his projections were off the charts, even if you accounted for the age that people in the league thought that he was, as opposed to the age that he was officially listed at. But I think one of the things that happened there that, is kind of a challenge, and I haven't figured out, we'll see if it comes up again. He was, playing in the Chinese league as a domestic player, and you're limited to 2 international players, and they can only play a certain number of combined quarters in games. So his team basically had this huge advantage that they had one of the very best Chinese players. It was him and Yi Jianlian were the best in the league. But then they also had the 2 American players there. So the American or international import players tend to guard each other. So he was going up against strictly Chinese players, whereas all the translations were based on what these international players, import players were doing when they came back to the NBA. So it wasn't quite apples to apples.
Wow, that's detailed. That's pretty crazy. What is you kind of alluded to it. What is the LaMelo Ball take?
His numbers are off the chart for someone so young, and he certainly has strengths, I think, that are going to translate to the NBA in terms of, he's not necessarily the most disciplined defender, but an extremely high steal rate, his assist rate, his ability to get to the basket. He's got the kind of things that you look for that are the things that do translate as players develop. He's obviously got to improve his shooting form and become, in his shot selection in particular, which is a big reason he shot so poorly from 3-point range in the NBL last season. But, again, the things you can't teach are what LaMelo Ball generally has, and his weaknesses are the things that are easy or to teach.
What are your Australian comps?
For him?
Like, who are the players that you look at that would be comparable out of that Australian league?
I mean, there's nobody exactly comparable, but he basically rated as well as anyone in the league last year, and that's pretty encouraging given the fact that you're talking about it might be a fringe NBA player that we're comparing him to, who's in the NBL, or someone who had a cup of coffee. I feel like Bryce Cotton may have been there, who you would remember from his stint with the Jazz. That level of player, but these guys are 28 when they're playing over here, as opposed to LaMelo Ball doing it at age 19.
And what's your thought on the kid out of Maccabi Tel Aviv?
Yeah, I was watching a little bit of film on him today, Denny Avdia, and he's got an interesting skill set because he's a pretty good playmaker. He can shoot it decently, even though his free throw percentage is a little worrisome. He's got excellent size. It was interesting that in watching the Maccabi film that they were using him to defend like shooting guards and point guards, and he's like 6'8", has wing size. So, I think in the NBA he might be defending more 3 and 4s, even though he needs to add some strength. I think the kind of the lower end scenario for him is he's kind of like Dario Saric in terms of he's just not quite a good enough playmaker that you want to put the ball in his hands. And when he doesn't have the ball in his hands, he's only kind of an okay role player. But I think the upside is that he can do a little bit of everything from the perimeter.
By the way, on Locked On Jazz, every day I'm doing a free agent. My free agent was Dario Saric today, and he's just the most average player in the entire NBA. Like, I actually think if you take 450 players in the NBA, probably take 350 rotation players in the NBA, I think Dario Saric is 175.
That sounds about right.
By the way, Andy Bunker is coming up. He'll have Arthur Treesh on, a longtime Atlanta Hawks executive, was in the league for a long time. He'll also have on the president of the Jamaican Basketball Association, and he'll have the Reggae Boys, from the Jamaican national soccer team on. I should have walked down the street because the Jamaican bobsled team actually trains in Park City, Utah, for parts of the year. So I should have just walked down the street. to go grab them. You can donate to help the Jamaican basketball team become the next Jamaican bobsled team by going to JamaicaBasketball.org or Venmoing Jamaica-Basketball or PayPal at Jamaica Basketball. 24 hours of fun basketball talk for the quest for Jamaica to make 2024. You mentioned the bubble, and you mentioned the German bubble, the Luke Sigma bubble.
Yes.
You mentioned the, since we're going to just do only Seattle references on this show, you mentioned the, I think some of the EuroLeague stuff, the ABC, whatever league took place. What have you found when analyzing numbers out of the bubble?
Yeah, I think I did take a look at a couple weeks ago is kind of basically how well does what you did before the season stopped match up to what you did in the bubble. And I didn't find any sort of consistent trends where, I thought I should be skeptical and not include the stats from those bubbles regular season seeding games in my projections for players going forward. One of the theories I had is that young players were going to be dramatically improved in those games because of the fact that you just have the natural improvement day by day that we just kind of think of as year to year, because that's usually the only place where we have that dividing line to distinguish between a player. It's kind of the old, if you see someone every day, you don't notice they're getting taller, but then all of a sudden the grandparents come in and notice that this kid is several inches taller than the last time they saw them. So, I felt that would be kind of the case, but it didn't seem like it was anything dramatic in terms of young players playing particularly well in those seeding games.
So I was actually going to get to this. You went to it. This was one of the more interesting conversations. I call Kevin just to get smart. And so he says something inevitably in every conversation that makes me feel like I know more. And then I sometimes steal it. Okay, so I always steal it and then act like it's mine. This was the one I think is interesting, is that you've heard, I think Kenny Smith was talking about the fact, and some others, that Tyler Hero is really in his second year. Donovan Mitchell was now in his fourth year. Jamal Murray was now in his fifth year. Those three players really exploded in the bubble. Your take was a little different. Your take was they just were 5 months older, and this is the natural progression of being 5 months older. Can you get a build off that? Because you just touched on it a little bit, but I think it's a really interesting approach to the way to look at it.
Yeah, and this is something where I'm standing on some research that's been done in baseball, and then I would also add to what's been done in the NBA with the Darko projection system, which is really good. And both of those suggest that basically when you're kind of looking to project out a player, the aging curve is not based on year to year; it's based on day to day. Like every single day, players are getting a little bit better or a little bit worse. It's just, as I said earlier, made the comparison earlier, it's not noticeable because it's such a small difference at the daily level as compared to at the annual level.
Okay, your application is now officially in to be the Jamaican basketball team's stats, Sam Hinkie stats guru, to help Rick Turner fill out his lineups, change the game, play a unique Jamaican style. Your application's in.
I would be honored.
Okay. Kevin Pelton, the best. Do you get a championship ring for your work with Help the Seattle Storm?
No. It's strictly covering. Strictly the two that when I was employed by the team in 2004 and 2010.
Still have those two?
Of course. They're sitting right over there.
All right. I got to go find my 2004 one. It's somewhere. Yeah. That's right. All right. Talk to you soon, my friend. Thank you very much for taking the time to join me.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.